Innovating Education Learning World in association with WISE, an initiative of Qatar Foundation.
The UN says that nearly half of the world's displaced people are children, many of them living in bad conditions with no access to education. Many organizations tried their best to help, but what more needs to be done to help young people cope? We explore this now on Learning World, and we hear an inspiring story. Thousands of Syrian families have fled to refugee camps to escape the violence in Syria, and now find themselves living in tents without even basic facilities. Their living conditions are desperate, especially for young people traumatized by their experiences. So what can be done to help? Let's find out in Jordan.
Here in Jordan, thousands of Syrian families live in this refugee camp, and more people are arriving all the time. Often, they arrive here with little but the clothes on their backs. Of course, NGOs at Zaatari are doing their best to help, but it isn't easy.
These children have nothing left. They've crossed the borders, left their homes, left their toys, friends, and even some of their family members behind. UNICEF has provided child-friendly spaces. Even before we started the schools here, children practiced activities like singing and drawing. And that can help them regain their self-confidence.
UNICEF provides primary and secondary education to thousands of young Syrians in these prefabricated classrooms. Morning classes for girls and afternoons for boys. Teachers from Syria and Jordan follow the Jordanian curriculum.
The problem with them is that they left school a year ago and they've lived through the revolution. We're just beginning with them. They're getting to know each other. And they're learning how to speak to teachers, be they Syrian or Jordanian.
Going back to school here wasn't easy for 13-year-old Mohammed. He wants to become an engineer, but he finds this UNICEF school tough going.
My school in Syria was better. We could understand each other there. Here, I can't quite get everything.
For other children, education is not an option. Their families need them to help with domestic chores or to earn money. Jabba and 9 other family members live in the refugee camp too. And although his 17-year-old daughter used to go to school in Syria, here she isn't allowed to.
I don't send them to school. I'm afraid of anything and everything. If the girls go out, they might meet someone who doesn't belong to my village in Syria.
Education is often the only hope for people in desperate situations, but desperation is often a barrier to education.
Working with displaced families isn't easy, and some organizations have found that collaborating can produce better results. We hear now from Dr. Lori Henninger, the director of the Interagency Network for Education in Emergencies, which is dedicated to providing safe, good quality, relevant education for everyone in times of crisis.
With thousands of different organizations around the world trying to provide education to refugee children, there is a serious need to coordinate. From UN agencies to small NGOs, they have a hub called INEE, a network based in New York. Lori Henninger has the task of running it.
We are a network of over 7,500 people in 170 countries who are committed to ensuring that all people have access to education during times of crisis and conflict. So without the need to say, it's my organization that has done this, or it's my institution that has done this.
Of the 61 million primary school children not in school, 40% are in conflict zones, from Chad to Syria and Afghanistan to Central America. But when survival is at stake, why bother with education?
The average length of displacement is 17 years. And so if you're looking at 3 to 4 years to become basically literate and numerate, you're losing so many children if education's not provided. And not just education where kids are warehoused for the day, but quality education where kids are actually learning.
The international community is now focusing on access to primary education, with the hope to meet the Millennium Development Goal of universal access to primary education by 2015. But it's not just about having access to a school.
If you are from Darfur and you speak Arabic, and you go to Chad, and Chad is a French-speaking country, what's the language of instruction?
Language is the most obvious barrier to learning for refugee and displaced children. They may return to their home country after missing most of their formative school years or without the chance to get back into education. An entire generation could be lost. For teenagers, the situation is worse. Secondary education is accessible to only 36% of refugee kids.
Education in emergencies receives about 2% of overall humanitarian funding. We're working very hard to increase that amount because it's desperately needed.
Alec Weck is one of the world's best-known supermodels, but she arrived in the UK as a refugee from the civil war in South Sudan. So, how did she manage to transform her life? And can her story inspire other women who have been affected by conflict? Let's hear from Alec herself now.
Supermodel Alec Weck lives in New York. The South Sudanese model was the first black model to get a cover of Elle magazine in the 90s. She has been a star on the catwalk ever since.
And this was the first apartment I used to live in when I first arrived in EU. The 3rd floor. Oh, that's the famous one.
Today, Alec can barely walk around her old neighborhood in New York's Lower East Side without being stopped by people who want to take a picture with her. But 20 years ago, she was a child refugee.
For me, having to have been a refugee once with my family, walking for, weeks throughout the fields and the bush, just trying to look for safety, not really having much on us at the time, I really felt for the other refugees that were not as fortunate.
Alec went back to her country in July 2012, traveling with the UN Agency for Refugees. She visited her native village Wau and the camp where her family lived. Today, there are 214,000 refugees in South Sudan.
It was very emotional because I had fond memories, but also I had the memories of when the war became really worse, and we lost our father as well.
After decades of fighting for independence from the north, southern Sudan ceded on July 9, 2011. But violence, tribal and cultural tensions are an ongoing issue. It's a young nation filled with hope for change.
More than 50% of the nation are under 18 years old. If they are not educated, I think it's a recipe for catastrophes.
Alec's father worked on the Board of Education. For her parents, education was the priority. But 64% of children aged 6 to 11 are not in school, and the primary school completion rate is only 10%. Alec's family fled to the UK in 1991. She was just 14 and was discovered at an outdoor market in London and started her brilliant career as a model.
You only see my job in camera, in pictures, and so forth. But whether you're a doctor, a lawyer, a writer, a teacher, whatever field you're in, you truly can make a difference. As we all know, what builds a great nation and a great community is collectively.
Well, that's it for this week. We look forward to hearing from you about this edition of Learning World on our social media pages. I hope you've enjoyed the program. Goodbye for now.
Learning World in association with WISE, an initiative of Qatar Foundation.